Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your board game doctor today. In this video, I'm going to talk about a couple of games. I've got 5 games that I want to discuss briefly and do a quick review. What I tend to try to do is focus on the unique mechanisms that appeal to me in the game. Talk about some game comparisons, what other people might be saying about the game, and then finally giving you a rating based off of criteria that I look for in games. And I will add whether I would seek this out, physically to buy and purchase for my collection, to play it digitally if it is available, or if it would be available theoretically in the future, or if I would just skip it in general. So let's start with Finspan. I recently talked about this game in the Gen Con video that I put out about a week ago. And this game, is everywhere in game stores that I'm, looking at. It's being played, and I did get the opportunity to play this game. I played it twice. I demoed it with, on my own on Tabletopia, as well as in person with my daughter. Of course, my daughter is not old enough to comprehend all of the rules, but we were able to at least I was able to play and kind of help her along as well. And so this game is a derivative of Wingspan, as we all know. And there are plenty of videos and media covering this game, but in this game, you're taking your fish cards, arranging them in a vertical mat or tableau, and activating their powers as you place divers, in their respective columns, and trying to create an engine that allows you to lay eggs, hatch them into young, breed them or collect them into schools, and from there just gather points that way, essentially. So how it differs from Wingspan to me, this is the major game comparison, of course, is that this game is a lot more straightforward to teach and to strategically understand. The cards themselves don't have as many nooks and crannies, as it were, different types of unique powers as you would see in games like Wingspan or Wormspan. Each card has a very somewhat basic ability. Most cards can be demonstrated or explained via iconography, and they're not text based, and so it's a lot more straightforward to understand and therefore teach to younger or more casual audiences, which I found a pro or a con depending on the situation that you want to be in. What I thought was pretty unique about this system was some of the minor mechanisms in how some of these cards worked, where you can place, for example, you can place different fish cards on top of other fish cards if their fin span is larger, simulating somewhat the nature of bigger fish eating smaller fish, etc. The way that you are arranging these is pretty flexible, but I do like the arrangements of the different bonuses that you get for each column. Here, for example, on the left, you draw cards. Here, you hatch or lay eggs, and then you hatch them on the far right column. The other mechanism that I thought was pretty interesting in this game, it deals with the hand of cards that you have. So you have a hand of cards that is not private to you, but is publicly seen on the side of your board, and you can use some of these cards as a cost, is essentially discarding other cards from your hand to a discard pile. And a lot of these cards allow you to retrieve discarded cards back to your hand. And so this was something that I had not experienced in Wingspan or Wormspan, where one, your cards were publicly seen and available, but two, you could also uh, do a little have some decisions to be made regarding which cards you want to discard and potentially bring back, and which cards to use for fodder, essentially to bring out other cards onto your tableau. So I enjoyed that. I think the biggest downside for me for Finspan was the ratio between the complexity of this game versus the time length. And I'll pull up my rating here. I think what dinged it for me was you do get actually two things. One is, and they're kind of related. You have 6 divers that you have, working for you each round. You have 4 rounds. You have 24 actions, and so it doesn't decrease like it does in Wingspan, and it's not as flexible as it is in Wormspan, right, with the money and so forth. And so the game felt longer than what I would have hoped it would play as. I think this would be an excellent game if it was like 30 to 45 minutes rather than 45 to 60. And that's relative to who you're playing with. Obviously, if you're playing with younger people or more casual gamers as well, it might take even longer. Very similar to the situation that you find yourself in Wingspan, which I think, even though it is a higher complexity game, it's not terribly complex as to reflect the time that it takes to play the game. And so I was hoping that Finspan would not outstay its welcome, but I feel like it did. And I think the complexity of the cards didn't necessarily help either. I felt like it's definitely not as complex, and you don't have as many decisions to be made as you do in Wingspan and Wormspan. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the game didn't feel as complex enough and didn't feel short enough for me to really enjoy this experience as much as I have with the other 2 games along this line. I would play it again, if there was a digital version of this game. I probably would get it. I probably would get this game too for the aesthetic, for the art on the cards, and to play with my kids. Honestly, like if they wanted to play this game, I would happily do so once they get a little bit older. But if I were in a situation where I wanted to play a board game in of this ilk with other board gamers, and I had an hour to play, I would rather play Wingspan in a relatively quickly pace with gamers who knew Wingspan as well, rather than play this game for 45 to 60 minutes. So those are my first impressions, I guess, of Finspan. I think that it's a good enough game, and I like how different it is mechanically compared to Wingspan, but it was not as complex and too long of a game for me to fully enjoy. So the next game I wanted to talk about is Café, which is a 2020 game by Costa y Hola. These are Portuguese designers who have designed games such as, I'll pull this up, Café Stevens, Dom Pierre, Moisteiro. These games that are Portuguese, historically Portuguese in nature, and so their works have been interesting to me. Stevens, in particular, is a game that recently came out in the United States under Capstone Games, and kind of has a theme similar to Lisboa by Vital Lacerda. And so that has me interested. Maybe I'll play that at some point. But Café recently, which means coffee in Portuguese, probably in Spanish too, I think. Café recently released on Board Game Arena to play, and so I decided to demo it and see what it was like. And this game, how it plays is you draft these cards. In the solo game here, it's 1 out of 3. You can play up to more players and have more cards to draft from, but you essentially are placing down these abstracted cards and rearranging them to allow for certain icons to be visible, such as these coffee cups, which give you turns, these beans that give you different colored coffee beans. You can roast them and process them and then ship them to your warehouse or to these cafe houses, which will allow you to get points as well. This game is somewhat simple to teach, but it does offer a little bit of complexity, and it kind of reminded me of Trailblazers, the game that came out a couple of years ago. I reviewed it on the podcast, And it's very much an abstracted card laying game where you can stack them one on top of another, and based on the way that they are arranged, determine how you can take actions and get points in the game. I give it a 6.9 out of 10. I think this game is fun. I would play it on Board Game Arena again. It doesn't boast the complexity and depth that I'm looking for in games, but I think for a game that does play relatively quickly, 20 to 45 minutes, it does offer an interesting puzzle to solve, and would be interesting as well to play this game with other people, maybe offering more cards to choose from, and more options to try or make it a little bit tighter to race to get those points. But I don't foresee this game being terribly complex to play, and so I think if you do like games like Trailblazers and like some of those other I forgot the designer's name, but he did Trailblazers and Pipeline. If you do like this sort of game but want more complexity, I would suggest Pipelines. And or if you like this style of mechanisms of card placement, one on top of another as a puzzle, then Cafe would be great for you. Next on the list is Hot Streak. This is a 2025 game published by CMYK, designed by John Perry, art by Cecil Gariepi. Apologize if that's not correct, but this game is a kind of a gambling racing game, or like betting racing game, where these mascots are racing down this track. There is someone who has a race deck that determines if these figurines will move forward, backward, fall on their face, etc., or swerve into each other and fall down. And before this happens, you are placing bets on who will win. I'm trying to find a good picture that shows these bets and side bets that you can draft. The reason that I'm showing you these pictures is that I was able to play this and demo this once at a board gaming event in person, so I don't have anything digital to show you. Play this with my family, and we had a great time. This game is whimsical and fun. Lots of opportunity to shout and hope for the best. But what I do appreciate about this game is that these cards that you're playing to determine where these mascots are moving, if they're going forward or backward, you have a certain deck of these cards. Some are left out, but they are predetermined before you start racing. And so everyone does know what kind of cards are in the deck. And so if one favors one mascot heavily, you may want to place your bets on that one. But everyone gets some cards in secret that they know could either benefit a certain mascot or hinder that one that seems to be heavily favored. And so you can, with that secret knowledge, place bets and hopefully rig the deck in a sense, because you choose one of those cards to put in to hopefully rig it in your favor to win money and have the most money after 3 races. So this game on paper sounds a lot like Ready Set Bet and other horse racing games, right, where you are placing bets and watching them run. And I haven't played that game, but from what I've heard, I think this differs because you do have this deck of racing cards or movement cards that you get to see before you start racing, rather than the real-time dice throws that you get in Ready Set Bet. And so there's a little bit more of an opportunity to bluff, I think, and have somewhat of tactical strategy kind of things going before you start racing, which is more interesting to me, I think. But I still have to play Ready Set Bet before I make that decision myself. But in any case, I think if you have the right sort of crowd, I think this game could serve really well in a party setting. There was another game that I was reminded of, but it escapes me. But anyway, I really enjoyed this game. I think this game would be fun to try out again. if my family wanted to play it again, I would for sure. I would pull it out to have a good time. Oh, and another thing that I like about this game is that they have rules for like down to 2 players and upwards of 9+ players, and so this would be an excellent opportunity to bring to like a convention or a party to play with. And I think it's pretty straightforward to introduce to folks who don't play board games as well. So it's a very universal type of game that could have success. It's been having a lot of success recently, and so I it's not necessarily what I'm looking for in a board game night per se, but if I'm feeling like playing a party game, I think Hot Streak might be an excellent choice for me, and for you, perhaps, if you do like this style of game. Next on my list is Pergola. This is a 2025 game that recently released on Board Game Arena. I was playing this game in alpha and finally finished it before it moved to beta. But in this game, you are drafting these action trowels to place different types of plants and bugs onto your tableau in more of a freeform type of style. You have other abilities such as progressing down this choosable water track, right? Where it kind of branches out to choose different insects. You have a pond here as well that you can, a pile of leaves that you can go to draft certain, flowers and bugs as well. All trying to arrange them in a way that fits with these predetermined criteria for play. So Pergola kind of reminded me of a kind of like an Applejack kind of game. It's not very. The 2 games that I thought of: Applejack in the sense of the strategy of this game, right? Like the goals are pretty much the same every time you play. It's just the choices that come out randomly for you to choose from is what makes this game different every time. And so I can see this game after a couple of plays being like, okay, I know what my goals are. I know what the trowels are going to be, the actions that I can draft now and potentially later. If you start to understand and know what is potentially going to come out, you can plan ahead and hopefully draft the ones that will make the biggest difference for you and be the most efficient for points, which is kind of similar to Applejack, where you kind of have free realm of where you can place tiles and potentially plan ahead to make sure you are achieving those goals that are pretty much the same every time. Visually, I think this game plays a lot like Bonsai, which is a game that I played in person. I think if I were to play Pergola in person, I would appreciate it a lot more. I gave it a 6 because I think this game would really hit more for me if I were to play it in person, but it doesn't quite have the right depth for me to want to replay it over and over again. I think it's more visually appealing to me rather than strategically. But a lot of people do enjoy this game. I think having it on Board Game Arena is a great place to try it. It's really implemented well where you can really place your plants anywhere you click or touch on. And so I think that's pretty innovative and neat. But when you cut back through the visual appeal, I think the game itself is pretty straightforward and fun, but not enough for me to want to replay it over and over again. But yeah, so that's Pergola. Next is Fancy Feathers. This is a Freedom and Freeze game out from 2022. This is around the time that I started to podcast / make videos. I think I was mostly in the podcast phase during this time, and I remember this game coming out during either Gen Con or Essen, and it was one of the first games that I was interested in and included on a list. And this game is a 2-player game by Freedom and Freeze, who's known for a lot of good games, where, and actually this is also a PSA about Yukata, which is where I could play it. They've revamped the site, and so it looks a lot cleaner, and so this is pretty neat. So if you didn't know that this happened, now it has, and so you can look at a lot of their games. Some of these which are not offered on sites like Board Game Arena, some of them are exclusive to Yukata, including this game. And so this is another great opportunity for you to look at what could be available for you to try out. Anyway, back to Fancy Feathers. In this game, it's a card drafting game where you start the game with a predetermined set of certain pheasants or birds out of a certain stack of them, right? So you have a randomized combination of these cards, and they are laid out in front of you in a sort of row. And what you're doing is placing your marker on a bird and drafting all the cards behind it. Each card and group of cards has a requirement for how it scores at the end of the game based on your collection. And so, for example, the blood pheasant scores 3 points. If you have, one of them, if you only have two of them, at the end of the game you have 6. But then if you collect too many, you you gain less points or even lose points at the end of the game. So it's a back and forth about drafting the right amount of birds and not trying to draft too many of them as well. And so I found that pretty interesting. You can play this up to 4 people online, but in person you would have to buy 2 decks to support that. So Fancy Feathers was an interesting enough game. It's an abstracted game, of course, and I am in line with pretty much everyone else. It's easy to teach. It kind of reminds me of, I guess, other simple and straightforward, not simple, but straightforward card drafting games. There are, a good number of them, so nothing really specific comes to mind. But yeah, I think it was pretty interesting, and I was glad to have the opportunity to finally play this. But I would probably try this a few more times to see if there's much depth. One game that does kind of is reminiscent to this is Forest Shuffle. I think Forest Shuffle has more mechanisms in place to make it a more strategic type of game. Fancy Feathers is less complex than that. It's more complex than a game like Colorado, for example, but it kind of falls mechanically in that a similar vein. And I think I would play. It's about equal for me between Colorado and Fancy Feathers, but games like Arboretum and Forest Shuffle, those are games that I would rather play over Fancy Feathers, I think. But I would be happy to try this out again. It's once again, not a very heavy game, but finally got to check this off my box as a game that I remember wanting to try out a couple of years ago and finally having the chance to do so. And finally, to round off this video, I have a bonus game. I finished playing this game before I had the chance to finish editing. So here we go. So this is Hey, That's My Fish. This recently released on Board Game Arena a couple of weeks ago. It's in beta right now. It's an older game too, from 2003. I've heard things about it, and I hadn't really thought much of it until one of my children saw this at the game store and wanted to see it. I think the fact that it has penguins and fish on it really did help out. But I learned it and played it on Board Game Arena and found out it was a pretty interesting abstract game where you place these, you randomly place these fish on this ice flow. You're trying to pick up as many fish as possible. Whoever has the most wins. And you also place your little penguin meeples or penguin figurines onto the board and slide them across the pond, picking up the fish wherever they had left off of. You can choose. The one thing about the base variant of the game is that you can choose in any one of these in a single line where you want to stop your penguin. So it's pretty easy to try to get these 3 fish tiles first, and then kind of strategically place these penguins in areas that are you might want to block off your opponent from coming over to a whole island, and so you can have all of these fish by yourself, because every time you move a penguin you remove that tile that it was on already. So the goal of the game is trying to move these and either have islands to yourself to really collect a lot of fish from, or block your opponent from getting to a big source of fish, for example, etc. Right. And there are variants of this game where you can push penguins, as well as I think you slide them, and so they have to go until they can't go anymore, whether they bump into a penguin or onto the edge of the board itself, or an empty space. I think that increases the depth a little bit and makes it more interesting for me. And actually, I thought that's how this game played anyway. And so, but having it be, uh, you know, I think approachable for younger audiences who want to play this game, right? Um, I mean, my child is younger than this age, but I think she could, my oldest, could play this game and not maybe play it well, but understand what is going on and do pretty well. And so I really like the look of this game. I think I would really want to try this game in person. And I, kind of compare this to Santorini, which, Santorini does offer more of a challenge when you throw in the different gods and powers that they have. This game is more straightforward than that, but still offers some flexibility and replayability in the abstract kind of game. So I rate it pretty high. I thought it was really fun and replayable, especially if you randomize all of those fish and play with the different variants. In that regard, it kind of reminded me of Six Nimmt, which is a game that I've played over 100 times with my family. We play it a single way, but there are different ways that you can arrange the cards and draft them to make it different as well. And so I appreciate that opportunity, even though you may not exploit that opportunity yourself. I like that that option is there in case you do want to switch things up a little bit. And so I do really really enjoy this one. I think I would play it again. I know I would play it with my kids, and I think that's a big selling point for me. I think visually this game, I think it has been um, reproduced and reskinned, I suppose. The later it's been, since 2003. So I do appreciate the visual aspect, which I think this picture represents. This is what it looks like now. And so, yeah, I think this was a fun abstract for me to play, and I quite enjoyed it. So that's hey, that's my fish, and that was a catchy title for my daughter as well. Easy for her to remember. Anyway, those were 6 games that I've played recently that I wanted to talk about. And so thank you for listening to some ramblings of mine on non Rosenberg games that I have been playing recently. As always, thank you for sticking around, and hope you schedule an appointment with me real soon. And hopefully, I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.